Many of you may know me by now. If not, my name is Rakia Ramsey. I am the director of the WILL program here. And I'm just going to give a little bit of background of the 1033 program as we start the policy session here. And then we'll dive into how we can move some of those ideas into action. So our overview will give just a little bit of a background about militarized law enforcement, excuse me, the history of the DoD 1033 program, review shipments to states, and go over, the various reasons for reform. Then we'll cover a little bit of what's going on at both the federal and state level, and then go ahead and move, talk a little bit about how you can move some of these ideas into action before we dive into the policy toolkit. So, as you may have heard in our last panel, the 1033 program is a huge policy for us here at Wand Will, because we feel that it's the first step towards reversing the trend of militarizing law enforcement and ending the practice of transferring U.S. military weapons, both domestically and to foreign governments, through the U.S. Foreign Military Assistance Program. As Janetta Elsie recalled her experience on the streets of Ferguson after Michael Brown was killed, she realized, or she said her and other activists at that time realized that we were connected to other unrest going on in Egypt and in Palestine and around the globe, because of the same weapons being used here at home were also being used against them. So what is militarized law enforcement? Despite there being a historical separation between military operations and domestic policing, this line has become blurred with increasing cooperation between the U.S. military and U.S. civilian police. This cooperation comes in the form of technology transfers, military weapons transfers, information sharing between police and the military in the name of domestic security, and establishing close operational relationships in drug-related crime and terrorism control efforts. We've also seen a growing trend in policing to rely on the use of force as the first step to solving problems, which leads to propensity of violence. So, as our panelists would have covered in the last section, or our last panel, this program did get started back in 1990 under the National Defense Authorization Act for the war on drugs, then expanded in 1997 to include counterterrorism. And they covered, I think, very well the different uses for the program there. And that law enforcement basically gets this equipment for free, only having to pay for shipping and storage costs and maintenance for the equipment. So, as Yasmin said, since the program's inception, over $7.4 billion worth of property has been transferred. And, this visualization is meant to show the flow of goods in the 1033 program from January 2010 through April of last year, 2020. So this is a 10-year sort of representation of the flow. Not the best graph there, but if we go here to the next slide, you'll see that most forms of the most common forms of this equipment are, the MRAPs and the tanks, utility vehicles. We also see rifles and pistols, and other like helicopters and other things like that. Night vision equipment is also extremely popular. Goggles, scopes, surveillance equipment, which actually run thousands of dollars per unit. They've been shipped to police departments that are often cash-strapped. One example, though, that I do want to bring up, because you'll see here down in the corner the dustpan. So not everything that is transferred, actually has a military use. So I found this as I was getting prepared. The Meade County Sheriff's Office in Kentucky actually ordered a single box of toilet paper just as COVID-19 was on the rise in the state. So I wanted to note that, because just imagine if, that county didn't have to rely on military transfers to get, needed toilet paper, or, needed supplies that we all were looking for at the beginning of the pandemic. So this here is a graph that I want to show that that shows the costs of the equipment and what the value is of that equipment per capita. So Texas and California actually top the list in terms of two states that acquire the most equipment. And when you look at the amount per capita, Alabama and South Carolina and Arizona are also notably high with regard to the top 10 states that acquired. And then if you look at the states with high per capita rate, we get a different list, but Alabama and South Carolina are still among the top 10. And also of note here is Minnesota, where George Floyd was murdered by police last summer, which sparked massive protests across the country and put a spotlight on police brutality and by extension the 1033 program. Again, we was sort of already grassroots organizations were already thinking about this after Michael Brown and what they have learned after that. And so, the reasons for reform are plentiful. For one, it perpetuates toxic masculinity and patriarchy. The toxic culture of police departments to be macho and hypermasculine only intensifies as law enforcement agencies move towards a more militarized approach, and the hierarchy established by masculinity principles of men over women, and of white men over men of color, and of straight cisgender men over gay, bisexual, and transgender individuals adds to the risk of violence. It also disproportionately impacts African Americans. A 2008 study found that militarized law enforcement is more often deployed to communities with larger African American populations. We're also seeing an increase in civilian deaths. In 2017, a study found that as law enforcement agencies received more military equipment, the expected number of civilians killed also increased by police. And, of course, when you have these weapons, as I just said, police officers are looking to solve with violence first. And so there is an incentive, and they're incentivized then to use this equipment and to have a more militarized approach. And on top of that, the federal government requires agencies that receive the 1033 equipment to use it within 1 year of receipt. So, there can be no doubt that participation in this program creates an incentive for law enforcement agencies to then go ahead and use this equipment. Just to sort of depict that here, we've seen a rise in military transfers, in the transfers of military equipment. This is look how much it's increased just in the past 8 years. We've climbed now to over $1.7 billion of surplus that have been transferred to police around the country. And as we've mentioned, there is a corollary effect here that as more police departments are receiving this equipment and more transfers happen, there's also an increase in the amount of fatal police shootings. Right. And this is just a depiction over the last year. So we are on track. Mac actually shared a resource that had us at a higher number. This is a report that I pulled from the Washington Post. They have a site where they are updating this information in real time, and this is the number that they have. But according to a resource that Mac dropped in the last panel, we are over 800 as of today. Okay. So who does this impact? An overwhelming majority of police shot and killed, or the majority of people shot and killed by police are male. And they also happen to be between the ages of 20 and 40 years old. So these are young males, young Black males. Although half of the people shot and killed by police are white, Black Americans are shot at a disproportionate rate. They account for less than 13% of the US population, but are killed by police at more than twice the rate of white Americans. And we also see Hispanic Americans are also right behind us and killed at a disproportionate rate, right behind the Black community. Just another depiction here of police shootings that are happening all around the country. Tends to happen more frequently in areas and cities where populations are more concentrated. And states with the highest rates of shootings are New Mexico, Alaska, and Oklahoma. So just to go through some of the recorded program failures and all of this, the program failures we actually have for you in the toolkit. I just pulled a few things that we had in there. So states can be suspended and terminated from inclusion in the program over lost, stolen, or missing items. According to a 2018 RAND report, over 276 suspensions at the state level between 2014 and 2016 took place, and 8 states and territories have been entirely suspended, and that includes Alabama, Alaska, North Carolina, New Jersey, Minnesota, Ohio, Rhode Island, and the U.S. Virgin Islands, according to the report. Another thing here, a report, 2-year investigation in Arizona revealed that the Pinal County Sheriff's Office were trying to, or had distributed millions of dollars worth of equipment to non-law enforcement agencies, and also had plans to auction off some of its arsenal to raise revenue for itself. And another fun, not really fun, but another interesting point that we also like to talk about here at Wand Will is the fact that the Government Accountability Office was able to create a fake police department and received, $1.2 million worth of controlled military items. So it's just another indication of how these programs are not really, there's not really a lot of oversight for these programs at the state level. There's a lot of room here to regulate the program. So to talk a little bit about what you can do, I think I actually skipped a slide. So first, we're going to talk about federal legislation. In 2017, the Trump administration rolled back the Obama administration executive order. He did sign an executive order, President Obama, in 2015, limiting the kinds of transfers. More recently, though, in 2021, as we've been talking about, Representative Hank Johnson reintroduced the Stop Militarizing Law Enforcement Act. And then in May, Congresswoman Velasquez reintroduced the Demilitarizing Local Law Enforcement Act, HR 3227, which fully repeals the program. And that is the bill that we are supporting, along with Senator Schatz's 1033 Reform Amendment and NDAA. And if you were with us and joined us yesterday for our lobby days, then you would know that those are the two programs that we are, the two bills that we are supporting there. And so what can you do? As we've mentioned, there is a lot of room here for state legislators to enact stricter limits on how local law enforcement can apply and qualify for the federal programs that allow for these military transfers. You can also, pass legislation, which is something that we're going to encourage you to do, to end and severely limit the program. Like I said, we have a toolkit here that I'm going to reveal shortly that has some sample legislation language for you in order to do that. Here are a few states that have done this kind of thing. So I'm not going to read that for you, but Montana, Virginia, Washington have passed some sort of bill at the state level that limits the type of equipment, and Connecticut, New Jersey, and Illinois have passed regulations that allow them to have more oversight into the kinds of equipment. Excuse me. Okay, so to talk a little bit about moving ideas into action, if this is a new issue, something that you're really passionate about, one of the first things, and there's not a lot of, I'd say, support with you, either among your colleagues in your party or, in a bipartisan nature, or even if you're in the minority, the first thing that you might want to do is start to build relationships with coalitions and grassroots groups. We here at Wand Will are in a demilitarization coalition, so we can definitely hook you up with folks that we're connected to and find some folks on the ground there for you. And then, of course, you want to just start messaging on this thing. You can do floor speeches, high-profile op-eds, anything that if you want to go to protests, please be safe. But, whatever sort of method to get the ball rolling and to start bringing attention to this issue, that is basically where you want to start. The next idea or the next point here would be then to use your leverage. So if you are a committee chair for a committee that has jurisdiction over this issue, if you are in the majority, or if you do have a good relationship with your colleagues and their shared values there, and something that you think, the environment is sort of prime to begin to introduce legislation. One of the things that you may want to do is, introduce legislation that's hard to refuse. So this is sort of the first step. This would be sort of like testing the waters and seeing maybe where the discourse might land, sort of where folks are on the issue, how they feel about military transfers and this equipment going into local law enforcement agencies. When I say hard to refuse legislation, maybe limiting the kinds of equipment that police officers are getting. And so, in the panel, they've talked about grenade launchers. And we saw that here in this presentation. Grenade launchers are, something that can be transferred. Maybe we reduce we limit the fact that police departments are able to obtain grenade launchers, because, do we really need grenade launchers? Maybe we limit MRAPs and tanks. Really think about the use and need for these types of things. And then, hold hearings, mandate reports, ask about the impact on the community, the health impact on the community. And then, of course, you can always lobby Congress, which hopefully you were with us to do that yesterday. If not, you can always do that in your own time. And as a state legislator, you have, you can bend their ear on certain things. You share constituents, and so you command a certain presence when you're asking to speak with them. And so we certainly want to encourage you to do that. And then, passing legislation. If you are beyond these steps and you can just kind of go full force here, then absolutely go ahead and introduce legislation. It would be helpful to do that in a bipartisan way so that it can be stronger and more sustainable. And, it will sort of withstand any opposition from those who may not be on board. And then, start with limits on certain weapons, sort of, again, hearkening back to what I was saying before. If you're on board, certainly I don't want to discourage incremental steps here. Any sort of step in the right direction, a step sort of in curbing this program is a step in the right, is just that, a step in the right direction. So, everything from being able to fully limit the program or curtail the program to maybe just starting with certain limits, or maybe just, starting out with certain reports that are required out of the agencies with regard to their use, with regard to fatalities, and things of that nature. And of course, we can be helpful here with you, or for you in doing that and introducing legislation. Here is a little screenshot of the toolkit that we have here for you. But yes, there we've got introductory language for policy, and that, give me just a second and I will pull up the actual toolkit here. Okay. Let me get to the toolkit. Okay, great. Here it is. So scrolling on down, here it is. So we've got we've got language for you on approval and review of participation of the program. Again, thinking about what would be sellable to your colleagues, to their just locally, politically, what's doable. Language here for Attorney General's approval and oversight. Limitations on property that is transferred and specifics. And then, language, of course, to completely end participation in the program, as well as public notification of law enforcement participation. So we are almost at time. There's nothing else. Thank you so much again for being here. Yes, hopefully next conference, inshallah, Mac. You all have a great, great Friday afternoon. Be safe over the weekend, and we'll talk soon. See you later.